a little over 30% of a society has to be engaged in a particular talking point, and that becomes a tipping point that changes things. So if we can get, we plus everybody else out there who's talking about the same thinking, we can get 30% of people to care about the plight of working class people and the declining share of wealth that the middle class has access to, forge a little bit of class solidarity, and focus on the fact that the wealth gap and the 1% control of our politics and our media, once those things are forefront in the mind of about 30% of the population, we've won. The left-wing people need to call out their own politicians. The right-wing people need to call out their own politicians. We, the people, need to get back to having conversations again and either being respectful of the opposing side's feelings about these poison pills and landmines in our conversations, or being willing to just let the idea that makes you unhappy, just leave it alone and keep talking about it until you can find the common ground on something. And when we as a society have reached the point where we can start to have conversations again without blowing up, when we as a society are holding our own representatives, our own party, or the people who are most closely aligned to us, accountable for the bullshit that isn't good for us down here on the bottom, and that's both sides doing it. After that, okay, then we can then we might get to a point where call to action and like, what do we actually do? Right now, I see the like ground level, floor one, foundationally, the first thing that we need to do, it's personal responsibility. Stop absorbing non-stop doom scroll outrage porn on your social media that makes it impossible for you to talk to somebody with a different point of view. Get out of your damn bubble and talk to somebody who's had a different lived experience than you, and instead of like viewing it as a personal attack or just dismissing them as some wokey or some fashy or whatever the hell you want to dismiss them at, like consider the fact that like, what if you live that experience and like take it in and adjust your worldview, like, so that, because you can't make, unless you're ready for bloodshed, and if you are, fuck you, like,
yeah,
you know, recognize the fact that we have all got to live with one another, and we need to get there before any real call to action can start. And we need to do that in numbers. There's a lot of research that says that all you need is, it's 32 to 33% of a society to be invested or engaged in a given topic. And that's the tipping point. A little over 30% of a society has to be engaged in a particular talking point, and that becomes a tipping point that changes things. So if we can get, we plus everybody else out there who's talking about the same thinking, we can get 30% of people to care about the plight of working class people and the declining share of wealth that the middle class has access to, forge a little bit of class solidarity, and focus on the fact that the wealth gap and the 1% control of our politics and our media, once those things are forefront in the mind of about 30% of the population, we've won. We've won.
Right. And, you know, and what I wanted to get to earlier, when we were talking before we were in filming today, that I didn't mention in our earlier conversation about where you and I started in our own families and our family situation. One thing that I've recognized in the last decade or so is that while I had thought of our family and our extended family, my family, as like solidly in the middle class, I am seeing signs that there are people in our family who are in danger of dropping out of the middle class. And I didn't even think that that was a possibility, but I'm seeing like how fragile that is.
Or that definition of what is and is not middle class, our economic reporting and data and models have not kept up with it. I remember when I when I first started working as a trash man, and I was making pretty decent money at that time. I was making like 25 some an hour, right? And I remember my old man saying, "Well, congratulations, you've made it to the middle class." Okay? And again, given where I was living, I still couldn't afford to buy a house. So in what world
Is that middle class
is a middle class person not able to afford to buy a house?
Right. Yeah, that's a reality for more and more people today. Like Gen Z and even the younger millennials, they're priced out of the housing market.
Completely.
And I mean that is a huge chunk out of the American dream just ripped away from people in just a generation.
You know, the way they've been priced out, that comes back to that we were just talking about housing. That comes back to something that we were talking about earlier or in a previous posting. That when that 1% and 2%, that extraordinarily wealthy class, when they have everything they could possibly need, and talk about the velocity of money, that has become one of the places that money gets parked. Housing used to be just considered a piece of the American dream.
Right.
Housing has now become just another investment tool.
Yeah.
And so it is in the interest of the extremely wealthy, because they just want a return on that investment, right? So they have all these incentives by whatever means necessary to make sure that the housing just keeps going up and up and up and up and up and up. And if you own a home, you're probably like, oh, this is great. My housing value keeps going up, until you want to go and sell it. Okay? And the dream house that you thought you would be able to afford, it's now that much higher than it was before.
Right.
And the entire generation of people behind you that used to be able to buy your home, they can no longer afford it, right?
Yeah.
And so it's one of these things that, like, I feel like we're getting close. We're not there yet, but we're going to hit a breaking point. And it could manifest in a whole bunch of different ways. My worst fear is that it manifests in widespread civil unrest. Like, you know, when, I mean, like, listen, you mess with a large, you know, I was talking about the fact that, you know, you really only need 30% of the population roughly before it creates a sea change. I would rather 30% of the population be really like on the same page with regards to how we make things better and how we fix things. My concern is, before we can get enough people on board, we're going to get to that point where it's 30% of the people are pissed off because they can't feed
they want
themselves.
a revolution.
They can't own their homes. They can't afford a car. They can't have kids. They can't pay down their student loan debts. They'll never go on the vacation that their parents and their grandparents all got to go on. And what's it going to look like when, instead of 30% of the population is looking for solutions, now 30% of the population is ready to burn it all down and knock stuff over? So we as a society have two choices. We can, again, come back to trying to have better conversations and start talking to one another and roll up our sleeves and actually do the real work that we need to do to kick the bums out and put some working class people in the positions of power who actually have a spine and a moral code, so they can't be bought, okay? So we can take the system over and start doing the things we need to do to not eat the rich, okay? But start to claw back some of the wealth that's been distributed away from people who work for a living and put it back in their hands, so we can increase the velocity of money, so that we can start creating new businesses again, so that housing is no longer just an investment mechanism, so that young families can buy their first home and start their family and start, you know, they talk about birth rates like that. That's another thing. Like, people aren't having kids because they can't afford to have kids. Like, it all comes back to some class solidarity and addressing the wealth gap. You know?
Well, the other thing that's crazy to me is that, so these billionaires and the 1% who control all this, they are killing the golden goose by their behavior, because it's unsustainable. They're only rich because people can afford to buy their shit, right? I mean, they only maintain that wealth. I mean, yes,
And there's
okay,
only
they can-
growth in the stock market for the same reason.
yeah, exactly. So I mean, yes, they can sit on their, billions of dollars, and I'm sure they have a big enough cushion to last for multiple lifetimes. So that's not an issue. But and maybe that being the case, they really don't care what happens to working people and to the economy and to the planet.
There are a handful of voices in that kind of billionaire 1-2% class that are actually starting to, at the very least, pay lip service. I think some of the Disney heirs. I think he was on Shark Tank, owned a bunch of sports teams.
Oh, Cuban, Mark Cuban.
Yeah, Mark Cuban. Even Warren Buffett has kind of raised concerns about that. There's still a tiny little minority. I think yeah, I mean, you're 100% right that they're killing the goose that laid the golden egg, and that we talked about this in one of our earlier videos about the research that's been done on the level of mental well-being, mental health, and general happiness of 1%ers who live in unequal societies versus more equal societies. And in every possible way, it is in their best interest to stop fighting so hard against the call to start to cure the wealth inequality problem. But and this is the cynical dark side of me, I definitely believe that there's at least a certain percentage of those people who really do believe it is possible for them to recreate, like the monarchies of Europe and the
feudal
techno
stuff.
feudalism.
Yeah.
That they believe that and they believe that, well, this time we can get it right,
Oh
and
my
I have nothing again, because this endeavor and our conversations are not for those people. They are for our people, but at the end of the day, I can't imagine the lack of giving a shit about the world you live in that you would have to entertain ideas like that. Are they all just sociopaths? Or are they just utterly terrified of the unwashed masses? Or is it
A little
something
bit
in
of
between?
both.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are studies like some huge percent of CEOs are actually psychopaths.
Yeah, yeah.
Literally.
Or sociopaths at the very least.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And to think about what would attract somebody into those jobs to begin with. I mean, you have to have a sort of hubris that you think that you're better than, smarter than, more agile than, a great percentage of people in order to even attempt such a thing or to.
And there's some of those same studies also indicate a lack of morality or an innate amorality. In other words, that you have no qualms or no issues with stepping on people, stepping over people, exploiting people to get what you want. And
Right.
and that's something I think you talk about some of the people on the right who would really like to be a part of that. I think because the handful of the people that I've known that entertain any ideas like that, when you're having a conversation with them, they will talk about being kind to people, being respectful to people, being compassionate towards people. And I don't know if it's naivete or, again, it is kind of a nerdy thing to be looking up the psychological profiles and studies of billionaires, right? So I'll cut them some slack for maybe not having seen that information and maybe holding, because there is a myth, the same way there's a myth about the self-made millionaire. There's a myth about these highly successful, very wealthy people who have built businesses, who are heads of industry. And there are a couple of people actually, Andrew Yang and Zach Garama. He was his campaign manager when he ran for office in 2020, and he used to be in finance. And Andrew Yang was an entrepreneur and was a venture capitalist himself. So these guys have worked with and been around some extremely wealthy, powerful people, and they said that it was really sort of disillusioning for them because they, like a lot of Americans, had believed, hey, somebody who starts this company and brings it to this and is this person who's on the cover of Fortune 500 magazine, this person must be smart. I should be able to learn so much from them. They're a captain of industry. And both of these guys said that when they finally got a chance to meet some of these people that they'd kind of admired from afar, and they got in the room with them, and they were hanging out in these clubs and these environments and these seminars and these meetings with these wealthy, powerful people, they were like shocked that they're not really that bright, that they're not particularly intuitive, that they're not really very aware, self-aware or aware of other people, that they ain't nothing special about these guys.
Right.
And that a lot of the people they knew when they were going to college or when they were working with scrappy little startups, that those people were a lot more interesting and inspiring and were visionaries in a way that a lot of these heads of industry are not. And that's a part of the myth that gets spread and talked about in America that hasn't really been, I think, adequately questioned. We just take it for granted that you can't get to that position unless you're special or somehow exemplary. And
we should know by now with the person in charge of the country that's not the case.
As you say, I don't really have any strong opinions on it. I mean, again, I've looked at that guy's just to be so that I could be intellectually honest and understand him. I've looked at him and the number of bankruptcies that's filed, the number of failed business endeavors. Again, I don't want to piss anybody off who holds him in high regards, but he, by the time he was 21, he already had millions of dollars because of the family that he was born into, and he went into real estate. And you want to make good, and please don't, because it's contributing to the problems in the world, but you want to make bank in real estate. That is a really easy business to make great money on. And if you compare our current leaders' return on investment to just about anybody else in that industry, and it's pretty underwhelming.
Yes,
by the numbers, if he had just taken all of the money he inherited and was given by his family and had parked it into, let's say, the S&P 500 index or the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index, he would have more money today than he does. Yeah. So, but again, there are a lot of people who put a lot of faith in him and hold him in high regard, and I think that's largely because he was willing to call out the flaws in the system and speak to the grievances and the complaints that a large percentage of the population had. Has he done anything to adequately address those things? No. And that's where I sort of have a problem with him, is I feel like he used my brothers and sisters, that he manipulated them to get the power that he craved.
Right.
And he has left them out. Again, I think we mentioned it in another one, in a case I edited it out because I wasn't articulate. You just look at the last time he was in office, he passed that big, honestly, it was one of the biggest tax reform and tax cut breaks that had been passed in several decades. But the thing that really, really deeply offended me is the fact that if you were in the top 1%, or 2% or even
got a
5%,
huge
your
tax
your
break.
tax cut was permanent. But if you work for a living up to, I think it was up to like $350 or $500,000 a year, our tax breaks expired.
And they were small. And they
And
were,
they were, it was crumbs.
Yeah.
But they expired starting at the bottom and then slowly working their way up. And they were all wired to expire. Either it was would have been during his second term or during the term of whoever took after him. So the tax breaks he passed for working Americans expired under Joe Biden. So you can't tell me that wasn't a really genius way to make sure that people's paychecks got smaller under a Democratic president if he had happened to lose. And then when you get to the big beautiful bill, if you're making, and I when I did mention it, I had my numbers wrong. If you're making less than $60,000 a year, your taxes go up.
isn't that insane?
If you're making millions a year, you get, I mean, when you get it at the upper line, you're getting like a $35,000 a year tax break. If you make millions, you're getting a $35,000 tax break. But if you make $35,000 a year total, your taxes are going up. So again, it's just another example of how, even though our current president speaks to the things that a lot of working class people who've been left behind are angry and upset about, when you look at the policies that he has implemented, he's actively hurting us and making the rich richer. And that to me is, that's something that I can't forgive the guy for, because he was sent there in large part because of blue collar, working class, and rural Americans to make their lives better. And he has actively taken money away from them and given it to billionaires. And that, I mean, if I was somebody, I was not happy with either of the choices. Actually, in the last of the several elections, I was not happy with any of the choices that I was given. But if I had voted for that guy, I would be absolutely fuming about that.